is not analyzed, or if it's happening through other platforms, like in many cases it happens, then they need to acknowledge that this is happening. If there's specific cases where women journalists are receiving specific threats through other platforms, then it is important for them to acknowledge that this exists. If smear campaigns are happening constantly through specific platforms, it is important that they acknowledge that this is happening. So these are the kind of threats that that they have to examine. Then they have to see their vulnerabilities. For instance, if their messaging apps do not have end-to-end encryption and they are proposing journalists to use it to talk to their sources, then, and this is something that happened in some point, and they didn't have security measures for those messaging apps, and then they need to reduce those vulnerabilities, and they need to acknowledge them. And they also need to analyze the stakeholder capacities. I mean, there's different groups in different countries of journalists that already had a lot of digital security skills. There's others that don't. So it is important also to acknowledge the different capacities that different stakeholder groups have in the different in the regions where they are deploying their set. Should be, let's say, the minimum kind of measures that platforms should put in place in all of the countries whatever they are working at. And then, these preventive measures will reduce the likelihood So this is from page 7 to page 12. Okay, once it starts with mitigation measures, it's going to. So you finalize in page 12.
There's a lady who wanted, and I told her.
Let me this time start from this side. On va commencer d'ici. Are you ready? If not, we... Okay.
Merci. Dans le premier point qui aborde l'analyse du contexte et des parties prenantes, ici on a préconisé une auto-analyse, une auto-évaluation des plateformes avec un système de reporting régulier à jour de façon périodique. Et ça permet en culturelle et religieuse des pays ou bien des espaces géographiques. Dans le dernier point, on a parlé d'existants de monitoring qui permettent de pouvoir évaluer les risques et surtout de voir s'il y a des indicateurs qui sont déjà posés ou mettre en place des indicateurs qui permettent de pouvoir, dans le contexte sur lequel on travaille, d'avoir des indicateurs qui permettent de pouvoir évaluer le risque, de savoir si ce pays ou la zone est sécurisée, vert, rouge ou des choses comme ça. Donc, travailler sur les indicateurs s'il n'y en a pas ou les renforcer s'il y en a. Merci.
Thank you very much. I think it speaks to some of the specific issues that we talked about. How do you, if you're evaluating risks, how do you go to like the cultural specificities? How does a company that is up there go all the down to the different cultural diversities and capture those specificities in this risk assessment and evaluation? Yeah.
Around the whole idea of developing an inventory of risk, and then that is made public, is actually spreading the risk. That means that those who may otherwise and may be deploying some of those issues, which then means that we are putting that problem in more hands. So we need to find a way to balance that. We don't think that necessarily making the inventory public it's the solution. Perhaps developing the inventory for purposes of training, sensitization of journalists about the risks that they face, and things like that, rather than making it publicly available to everybody, given the possibility that it will be used for negative purposes by bad actors. The other question is around when do you need to do a risk assessment? Which is a harm, potentially harmful. Is that a human rights issue? Is it a human rights risk? The spread of disinformation or misinformation. So I think we would unduly limit it if we say it's just human rights, because there will be some of those things that would fall out of the basket.
Okay, so noted. I come here. What is the rationale for choosing the speakers?
Okay, thanks. So we were discussing on the issue of digital platforms, what these emerging issue right now on the global south. So the issue we raised here is the legal framework depending on the country. We have seen that it has been affected by geopolitics or geoeconomics. Essentially, when we look at how when we are approaching into electoral processes or ahead of electoral processes. Right now in Tanzania, Telegram is shut down. A few weeks ago, X or Twitter was shut down. But due to this issue, that means there is either electoral processes, because we are going to towards the general election next year. Now the local election has started. So the issue here, it's either over-exaggerated, and now the journalists, they are facing either to be transparent or just to PR the government activities. So they have to choose either way. And the issue of the crisis that is going on, the war in Ukraine. So the issue here has come into the geopolitics, where the propaganda of different countries, they use the platforms. And the geoeconomics, the issue of the influence of China to Africa or global south or Latin or America and so on. So there are these giants who is controlling the media, the outlets, or who is controlling the media. So here we look at the legal frameworks. So if the legal frameworks and the institutions are very strong, just open to transparency and so on, they don't have to block. The country should run on just to regulate, but not to just to block the platform. So here you see some of the journalists, they are earning their income from this platform and so on. So once you block, even if they're giving you the transparency to the citizen, it's going also to affect even other processes as well. So we are just looking at it. Thank you. Huh? You can add.
You wanted to add a point? Yeah, please.
Okay, so another point, I think that's on page 9, that talks about when do you need to do a risk assessment in the context of journalist safety online. I think for us the discussion was what triggers the change of this framework.
Sorry, I didn't get that.
Page 9, the point that talks about when do you need to do a risk assessment in the context of journalist safety online. I think when we're reading about number 3 in response to emergencies, I think this point needs to, what triggers need to happen for, you know, the framework to sort of like be updated. Yeah.
I think Anna Christina will speak about other risk assessments, like in the context of emergencies and conflicts. Probably, you know, it could capture some of the questions that is related to emergencies. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. I nearly skipped presenting, and when they told me we need to do gender balance, I told my colleagues I identify as someone else. But anyway, from this group, one, we realized that when it comes to the risks, and of course the threats extended to journalists and other media practitioners, there was a narrow-list approach of only looking at government and political leaders. Yet, by extension, we could have, you know, business or risks to the journalists. So I think we need to expand more on that, so that it's not only limited to government and political leaders. I think that is also in regards to the hostility that is meted out on journalists. So it should not just be a preserve of only government and then political leaders. We need to expand on that. Then there is also somewhere where it is, you know, we're not sector specific in terms of the risk assessment. So we need to appreciate that different journalists or media practitioners have different levels of vulnerability to these risks as they partake their work. So someone who is a journalist who's covering, say, you know, political affairs, does not have the same level of vulnerability as one who is covering, say, entertainment. So there is, I think, need to be very sector-specific as these risks are analyzed and then, you know, identified. Then there is also over-reliance on, you know, platforms, the digital platforms. And we think that, you know, I think everywhere, almost everywhere in the framework, we've tried to put a lot of weight on the media platforms to sort of identify all these risks, but then it's not practically possible because we need to involve other, you know, stakeholders, especially those whom this framework is targeting, because there's no one who can better define risks than actually those who are affected. So I think we need to place, you know, the beneficiaries or the intended, you know, constituency for this framework at the center of, so even identifying, you know, the risks. Then, yeah, I think that sums it up. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that is interesting in terms of who do you think requires more protection in terms of what they cover. Just this year, earlier this year, we published an issue brief about attacks on environmental journalists. And we did research over the last 15 years to see the trends in how journalists who cover the environment have been attacked. And probably, you know, 15 years ago, you wouldn't think that someone writing about environment could have the vulnerabilities like someone who's writing about politics. We actually found out that over the last 5 years, the trend has gone up. So you're very right. I think there's this dynamism that some issues become more important at certain points in time than probably before. Anyway, so let me come here. Yeah.
Bon, je vais juste à la page 12 comprendre le cadre juridique et politique du pays. Donc, les cadres juridiques et politiques, c'est quelque chose d'assez complexe en fonction des pays, puisqu'il y a une variété de législation, souvent, à caractère spécifique mais aussi général. Donc, on s'est dit ici au niveau du groupe que peut-être il était important de spécifier un peu la compréhension de ces cadres juridiques. Et puisque aujourd'hui nous avons des lois cyber, nous avons les lois pénales, nous avons aussi au niveau notamment de certains pays en Afrique de l'Ouest, comment on appelle des directives communautaires, donc au niveau de certaines organisations régionales. Je crois que c'est tout. Hein?
I think, the issue of specificities is a very complex one. To what extent can you be more specific? I think it goes even back to the point from that group where they were talking about the inventory. If you do the inventory and list it, this is ABCD up to whatever Z, what does that, is that inclusive enough? So media, newspapers and this radio, I think it also goes back to the same issue. Radio journalists more vulnerable than newspaper journalists in some contexts, yes, where radio becomes a key media. In some other countries, it's newspapers that actually, shape the agenda, and I think there are all these dynamics.
In our group, we also discuss, and we feel that there's too much responsibility given to the platforms. It's like discrimination, because if you look at the UN Action Plan, the same level of responsibility is not given to media owners, for example, the media houses, but it seems we are over-targeting and over-expecting. So we also ask, what is the responsibility of the individual journalist, for example? If we went to work, I took a photo of my fellow colleague and posted it online, then he's attacked. Is it the responsibility of the digital platform owner or what? Do media houses have our media policies that then also protect their own journalists, or is it just the digital platforms? So we need to see a balance and see the role of, one, the individual journalists, and two, the supervisors. Because, for example, in most of our media houses, if I used my official email, the photo, the investigative story first goes to the IT department, who have access to that story, who can also leak it out. So what responsibility is there for that? My supervisor, for example, I'm doing an investigative story that is risky. He calls me or she calls me on my normal number, routine number that I use, and they know very well most of our editors and investigators are always under surveillance by police, by national state intelligence and all. So do you have a responsibility to ensure, if I'm briefing you a story that is risky, to tell me to use a safe number, a safe platform, or do I just use then expose myself? What will be the role of the digital platform if my supervisor is irresponsible? So sometimes the media houses are chasing stories, and they already announce the story that in our bulletin tomorrow we will have a story on such and such corruption, whatever it is. And most of the people know which hospital she has been taken to and the rest. Now they're exposing that purely because of their own responsibility. They're putting the photos online, saying which hospital is it. So what is the responsibility of the digital platform? Then there's a lot to borrow from the UN Action Plan, because if you look at the same document developed by UNESCO, that it gives a lot of some of these definitions and approaches and mitigation that we just need to incorporate and say online and offline. online and offline, without re-establishing new concepts, because several concepts from one institution or from same stakeholders also causes some confusion. So I beg to present. Oh, sorry. Yes.
Thank you so much. Can you guys hear me? Yes. Can you hear me? Because I can't hear myself, but I also want to make sure.
Next section, specific responsibilities for other stakeholders. Name them, like specific measures that should be put in place for media houses, specific measures that should be put in place by governments, which could create a problem, I say, because there's a specific risk assessment that governments should do through mechanisms of protections, that involve other kinds of threats, legal threats, technological threats, physical threats, psychological threats.
we wait for the interpreters to be back in their booth. And in the next 1 to 3 minutes, we will go with our session. La session sera en français, mais comme d'habitude, vous savez, il n'y aura pas beaucoup de slides pour cette session. La session est basée sur les pages 16 en français jusqu'à la fin, jusqu'à 23. Alors, pour les personnes qui ne peuvent suivre en français, vous avez les appareils pour écouter la traduction. Okay. Alors, chers participants, nous allons continuer avec notre programme sur ce module. C'est un module qui porte sur les mesures d'atténuation, y compris les mesures de prévention et les réponses par rapport aux risques relatifs qui pourraient affecter les journalistes. Et le document qui vous a été proposé est un document qui préconise un certain nombre de mesures. Et ces mesures, il y a des mesures qu'on considère comme des mesures minimales, le minimum que les plateformes devraient pouvoir garantir. Et parmi ces mesures minimales, on pense que les plateformes pourraient intégrer la question de la sécurité dans le développement et la conception des produits. Cela suppose, on vous a dit tantôt par exemple, qu'il y ait des moyens par lesquels on assure le cryptage des échanges d'informations, les moyens par lesquels les personnes peuvent effectivement s'assurer que les données qu'elles ont placées en ligne sont bien protégées. C'est assurer aussi une efficacité continue, c'est-à-dire que régulièrement, les plateformes devraient être en train d'évaluer l'efficacité du dispositif de prévention de risque qui a été mis en place. Ça doit être un exercice continu, ça peut être un exercice qui se fait suivant une périodicité déterminée par chaque plateforme, mais tout au moins, il faudrait qu'il y ait cet exercice-là et que les plateformes puissent offrir aux utilisateurs, plus précisément aux journalistes, des moyens de recours en cas où soit des décisions qui ont été prises ou bien soit parce qu'il y aurait des contenus qui impactent sur leur sécurité, qu'il y ait des canaux, soit de communication, qu'il y ait des moyens, des interfaces qui permettent de pouvoir faire des recours et que non seulement qu'ils permettent de faire des recours, qu'il y ait un suivi de ces recours-là et que les suites qui ont été données au recours puissent être communiquées aux personnes concernées. Autre chose, c'est la participation. Nous l'avons dit depuis le début, c'est que l'implication des différentes parties prenantes dans tout ce processus de gestion des risques est particulièrement importante. Je crois que les uns et les autres tantôt ont dit que ce n'est pas juste la responsabilité des plateformes. J'ai entendu parler de ce que même les organes des médias ont aussi une part de responsabilité là-dessus. Donc, on pense qu'il faudrait, ce qui est recommandé par le document qui vous est proposé, c'est que les parties prenantes devraient être toutes les parties prenantes devraient avoir la possibilité d'être impliquées dans tout ce processus. Non seulement les journalistes professionnels, mais aussi les médias et ainsi. Et cette implication, ce n'est pas l'implication uniquement au niveau du dispositif, mais aussi dans la phase de la conception de ce dispositif-là. C'est-à-dire permettre à ce que, lorsque un nouveau dispositif est mis en place, qu'on consulte les différentes parties prenantes pour voir comment est-ce que ce dispositif pourrait soit être utilisé pour améliorer, pour réduire les risques qui pourraient impacter des journalistes, ou comment est-ce que les journalistes peuvent effectivement en profiter. Donc ça, c'est l'un des aspects qui a été proposé. Et aussi, le document propose aussi des fonctionnalités améliorées pour la sécurité. On a parlé par exemple le chiffrement, comme je l'ai dit tantôt, de bout en bout. Ça c'est purement technique, hein, c'est-à-dire qu'un ensemble de dispositions très techniques pour garantir la sécurité, l'intégrité de toutes les informations qui sont placées sur les plateformes. L'aspect de la transparence et de la responsabilité, on ne le dira pas assez, c'est que à chaque fois qu'il y a des actions qui impactent la sécurité des journalistes, on souhaiterait que les dispositions qui sont prises pour pouvoir les gérer, que les plateformes puissent en communiquer. Je crois que tantôt on a parlé de la possibilité pour les plateformes de produire des rapports et de les rendre publics. Quelqu'un demandait à qui est-ce qu'on doit transmettre le rapport, mais je crois que le simple fait que les plateformes puissent rendre ce rapport public semestriel, ça peut être des rapports annuels, le simple fait de les rendre publics, ça permet d'apprécier l'engagement des plateformes en faveur de prévention de toutes les actions qui pourraient porter atteinte à la sécurité des journalistes. Et d'autres dispositions qu'on a abordées sur les questions de formation des journalistes, qui sont les mesures concrètes que les plateformes peuvent faire, c'est par exemple soutenir les initiatives de formation sur la sécurité numérique. On sait qu'aujourd'hui Google propose pas mal de formations. Pourquoi est-ce qu'elle ne le ferait pas, il ne ferait pas? Lorsqu'il y a des situations de crise, au nombre des mesures minimales que vous trouverez dans le document, c'est des contenus qui, par exemple, ont été publiés, qui visent ou bien qui portent atteinte à la sécurité des journalistes, qu'il y ait sur des plateformes la possibilité de les signaler, non pas seulement comme un contenu préjudiciable, mais que c'est un contenu qui porte atteinte. Pour le moment, c'est vrai qu'il y a des plateformes, les plateformes permettent de pouvoir dire que ce contenu est préjudiciable, que ce contenu il n'est pas bon, mais on voudrait que cela puisse aller au-delà, qu'il y ait la possibilité de pouvoir apporter et de mettre en évidence que certes le contenu il est préjudiciable, mais ce contenu impacte particulièrement un journaliste ou bien des journalistes. Donc ça c'est ce qui est préconisé. Et aussi, il a été fortement recommandé depuis le début, et je pense que c'est une redite là, cette implication, y compris de la société civile, y compris le monde académique, des droits humains et surtout la protection des journalistes, devraient avoir leur mot à dire, devraient pouvoir, dans le cadre de processus consultatifs que les plateformes mettent en place en lien avec les mesures pour la protection de la gestion des risques, ou bien je m'arrête donc à ce niveau et je me tourne vers la suite. Okay. La suite, c'est que nous allons faire cet exercice pendant 20 minutes, tout au plus. Alors, est-ce qu'au regard des mesures d'atténuation qui se trouvent dans le document, pour la version française, je crois que c'est à partir de la page 13 ou 14 jusqu'à la page 20. Oui, donc, voilà, le document français c'est 15. Voilà, donc de regarder toutes ces mesures-là qui sont préconisées et de nous dire est-ce qu'il y a des lacunes ou des domaines à améliorer dans les mesures là. Et pour les mesures correctives. Donc il y a les mesures d'atténuation et il y a aussi des mesures correctives. Donc vous essayez de regarder qu'est-ce qui manque, qu'est-ce qu'on pourrait renforcer, qu'est-ce qu'on pourrait améliorer par rapport à ce que vous trouvez dans le document actuellement. Donc nous avons pour... Sure. We are now going to give the floor to this group to report. Who is the one? Is it a Gen Z or not? Ah, okay.
Sorry. Yes, from our discussion, I think our analysis on the mitigation measures was not quite a balance on the areas of transparency and accountability vis-a-vis anonymity tools. I think when we're speaking about these platforms offering anonymity, and then you talk about identification of users that are frequent perpetrators of threats, I think that then doesn't give the balance, and that should be identified clearly. And then another issue was around the practicality of transparency reports when it comes to digital platforms, because they're majorly non-profit. I mean, that should also be clearly identified how that is going to be done. And then the other issue is was around the preventive measures, where you talked about enhanced privacy and security features, where you mentioned end-to-end encryption, two-factor authentication, of course, and anonymity tools. We're looking at scenarios of spyware and what they can do to, break down these, these features. I think that also needs to be highlighted. Beyond these features, I think we have things like spyware that we need to identify what tools are able to prevent such, threats. Because when you look at Pegasus and how it affects, or is used, I mean, we have things like the 0 clicks, where you don't even need to click the link. You just have to open your phone, and then the spyware is in your phone, and how does that, of course, react to? And then the other thing that we highlighted, sorry, I'm all over the place, but when we still talk about training and resources for journalists, I think also the question is, what's the practicability when you're looking at crisis response kits for journalists? I think that also needs to be, very specific in terms of how journalists are going to be helped, And then the other issue is under two-factor authentication. You talked about encourage and require the use of 2FA to add an extra layer. And then you mentioned journalists' accounts. I think that has been a discussion that we've had. Should it only be journalists or human rights defenders and other people? Yeah. Any other?
Thank you. In addition, there are 3 other issues. One on the, I think, the continuous risk assessment, because there could be new risks that need to, because it's different from the periodic analysis, but this is now continuous risk assessment, because there are new risks that come every day. And then the other one, and the mitigation, it is more of online measures, apps, but I think there is also need for offline, because in the era of internet shutdowns, can we think about other offline applications that people can be able to communicate apart from online, because most of these are online applications. Then the last one for me is about legal response. It's not coming out clearly in terms of as a response mechanism. Do we have a directory for the legal response contacts, but also in terms of the legal response strategy? I think it would be good to develop that. Thank you.
Thank you very much for pointing out some of the aspects that need further clarification. You mentioned, for instance, the aspect of tools that journalists can use. You have to be clear on what are those tools. You also mentioned the importance of striking the balance between transparency, identification, anonymity. So this is well taken care of. And you point out that not just focusing on online, but also thinking about how offline measure can be taken to improve the safety of journalists. You also point at the aspect of legal response. So I think this is all well noted, and we thank you for your contribution. Let me move here.
Merci. En fait, nos discussions ont porté sur, disons, un mécanisme ou en tout cas une possibilité pour protéger les journalistes en ligne, et nous avons beaucoup plus parlé, en tout cas, disons, de moyens d'identification des journalistes et voir s'il appartient à une entreprise de presse, s'il est effectivement, s'il a une carte nationale de presse de son pays, et ainsi de suite, mais en tout cas avoir un badge d'identification média pour les journalistes en ligne. Maintenant aussi, faire une éducation, c'est-à-dire sensibiliser les journalistes sur, disons, l'utilisation des réseaux sociaux, le comportement à adopter et les risques, disons, aussi à éviter, parce qu'en réalité, la vie, disons, en ligne requiert un certain nombre de dispositions que les journalistes doivent savoir, parce que, en fait, c'est pas parce qu'ils se croient dans leur rédaction ou bien dans la vie réelle qu'ils peuvent tout se permettre en ligne. Et donc, par rapport à ça, effectivement, il faut un programme quand même de sensibilisation, mais surtout d'imprégnation des journalistes pour qu'ils puissent, en tout cas, savoir quelle posture qu'il faut adopter en ligne. Par ailleurs, également aussi, il va falloir aussi travailler à, disons, sensibiliser les utilisateurs aussi pour éviter les attaques injustifiées et surtout à l'égard des femmes journalistes, parce que ça peut créer des traumatismes. Et par rapport à ça également aussi, insister surtout sur le rôle essentiel des journalistes pour la protection de la démocratie, mais aussi des droits humains et surtout aussi pour l'éducation des masses. Merci. Si quelqu'un a quelque chose à compléter.
Thank you for your contribution. They are pointing at the importance of, or at the issue of how to identify journalists. Are we focusing on journalists with an ID as journalists, or a press ID as journalists? Secondly, it's the importance of digital risk education for journalists. I think these are the two core points that they have raised in the group. Let me go here.
Okay, I've been nominated by the group, so I hope I capture everyone's points. I think the main thing we discussed in this section, but also throughout the document, is the gap between implementation of the framework itself and how it kind of relates to other existing documents. So some of my colleagues have the preoccupation that, you know, the platforms won't enforce the framework or won't really do the redress or other components of it without a monitoring mechanism. So they suggested perhaps adding that. Another comment made was, does the redress relate to already existing measures or new ones? And then another comment made around, I think it was point 8, around the deep fakes. Like, does it get too specific around that specific? I think at a different section there was a conversation around this session whether this document should cover also emerging kind of components, emerging tech, and so that's a question that we had. And then around other components, around just risk assessment is continuous, really, and evolving. So at what point, what does it make sense for it to be proactive? So going back to the part around implementation of the framework itself. So I don't know, did I capture everything, colleagues? Would you like to add anything? Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Of what I've heard, it is important to, they are concerned about the ability of digital platform to enforce. How do we ensure that the digital platform are actually implementing the guideline? So I think this is a very important question. At the end of the day, if there is no mechanism for enforcing all of this, if it is just left to digital platform to decide what to do or not to do, we may still have a very, very long way to go to achieve our objective here. So we thank the team for it. Yes, please.
I think the other point that is crucial is there is some work being done around systemic risk and risk assessment, and not to bring. I know this document wants to cover some of the other work and be a harmonizing document. I think that while I don't think the DSA does everything, and I don't think it should be copied, I think what it points to, though, is that around risk, there's some, in the implementation, that's where you see a lot of the issues that come with it, and professionals that can. And I think that's also what we've been talking about at this table. My colleagues have mentioned people who are independent, right, who would do the work. That's, I guess, one of the gaps, right, that is, I think, important, but also recognizing how this harmonizes with the wave of the other kind of documents within instruments within the ecosystem without, of course, I don't like to emphasize the DSA too much because it's a European document, but at what point can we, we need to still think about it, so.
Yes, I think it's a good point, how to ensure that we are not asking even sending contradictory message to digital platform. DSA, we have UNESCO guideline and so on, how to ensure that there is a certain harmony. I think that's what UNESCO has been trying to do with the guideline, coming up with this set of guidelines with the objective that in different parts of the world, countries will be able to adapt to the concept, but while remaining within the principles laid out in the guidelines. So I think, ici? Oui, ici.
Merci beaucoup. Alors, on a parcouru les mesures d'atténuation. On a trouvé que c'était assez complet. Merci beaucoup. Alors, les points sur lesquels on est revenu en général sont des mesures qui vont toucher, on va dire, tout le monde, sauf les plateformes. Donc en fait, on revient à la question de tout à l'heure, est-ce qu'on peut impliquer d'autres parties prenantes? Et ici, concernant les mesures préventives, l'une des premières parties prenantes, c'est le journaliste lui-même. On s'est dit, est-ce que dans les mesures d'atténuation, est-ce qu'il y a l'autoprotection du journaliste? C'est-à-dire, est-ce qu'il active sa redevabilité? Comment il utilise les principes déontologiques en ligne? Est-ce qu'il connaît ses limites? Est-ce qu'il connaît les comportements à risque en tant que journaliste en ligne? Donc vraiment, l'autoprotection du journaliste. Ensuite, il y a, on a parlé de solidarité métier. À quel moment en tant que journalistes en ligne, ils se sont mis ensemble. Est-ce qu'on a des associations ou des fédérations de journalistes en ligne? Est-ce qu'on a une charte que la réflexion ou la démarche existe déjà? Et à quoi cela pourrait servir? Ensuite, on s'est dit, dans toutes les organisations internationales, il y a énormément de policy. On va avoir une policy gender, on va avoir une safeguarding policy. Est-ce qu'au sein des médias, est-ce qu'on a une policy pour l'utilisation des plateformes digitales que les journalistes pourraient appliquer, signer, respecter, etc. Au niveau des mesures correctives, on touche un petit peu au mécanisme de signalement. On s'est dit, le journaliste sur la plateforme peut, comme on dit, voilà, activer un signalement classique que la plateforme est en ligne, mais au sein de sa corporation, c'est-à-dire en dehors de sa plateforme digitale, comment il active ce signalement? Est-ce qu'il a un mécanisme de safe call? Comment il est protégé en deux? Et là, ça devient très, très violent, parce que ça vient de la corporation, il y a une logique concurrentielle derrière, ça peut faire très, très mal.
De l'Ouest, et si possible, étendre ça dans toute l'Afrique de l'Ouest et dans toute l'Afrique, si possible, parce qu'en fait, les problèmes sont les mêmes. Et l'autre chose également aussi, en offline, bien entendu, si les journalistes se sentent menacés ou qu'ils font l'objet d'attaques, il y a des saisines. J'ai été très souvent, en tout cas, saisi par des confrères ou des consoeurs pour des attaques, disons par rapport à une attaque auquel ils auraient fait l'objet, et au sein de appel ou de la coordination des associations de presse, c'est un cadre qui regroupe les 8 grandes organisations des médias sénégalais. Alors là, soit on fait un communiqué ou on fait carrément une lettre de protestation adressée à l'autorité, ou bien en tout cas on rappelle aux populations, on rappelle en tout cas disons aux utilisateurs d'Internet les fondamentaux de notre profession, et aussi rappeler aux journalistes qu'ils doivent être davantage responsables et éviter en tout cas de prêter le flanc pour que les autres s'attaquent à eux ou leur disent du mal. Donc pour vous dire qu'en tout cas, il y a des tentatives de réponse, même si parfois elles ne répondent pas à, disons, tous les besoins, à toutes les questions, mais quand même il y a des initiatives qui sont là et qui tentent quand même de rectifier les choses tant bien que mal. Merci.
À lui? Oui, donc vous pouvez le voir alors. Alors, thank you for your point. I think they raised the point that there is too much focus on digital platform, on online, and that we should also shift from the responsibility of digital platform to the responsibility of the journalist. And the journalist, as an individual, should also be well aware of risk online, risk that he or she may generate through an action online. And this is in line with what this group has said of the importance of risk education, online risk education for journalists. But I have the feeling that because this tool is mainly on risk on digital platform, that is probably the reason why in the document you are not seeing too much focus on the journalist as an individual, because it is the risk that may affect journalists through digital platform. That's the reason why there is not too much focus on the journalist as an individual. Let me move to the last group.
Hello. Yeah, I think the one point that we were discussing on the security features is about how, for example, Elon Musk used the verified badges as a way to make a business, and that should not be, that verification of the information profile should be part of the platforms, because that can help journalist safety. So we were discussing that there should be a security recommendation that platforms should not try to monetize or make a business of the blue check mark. So because that can spread misinformation, that can help attackers or impersonation of journalists. So that was one of the points.
We kind of got into a discussion that we haven't quite, we're split in between the table. And the conversation or the conversation was about ethical principles for journalists. Now, should journalists then be given a marker on the platforms, or should they be left out on their own? So we are still split as to how to handle that, because half of us feel that that's giving the platforms too much strength, too much power to use. Yeah, so that we shall bring to plenary for us to agree on which becomes, which takes the consideration. We feel strongly that there's need to conduct digital literacy programs for duty bearers, and from here we're looking at media owners, the lawyers that we use to go and litigate, the police, the judicial systems, and then also training the journalists themselves on responsible use of platforms. Yeah, I think the rest have all been articulated within the room.
Yeah, so it's not gender really, but maybe we can talk about that. So I wanted to also add on something in regards to the training and resources for journalists, and commenting specifically on the digital security training. So I would suggest that maybe it would be great if we could call it holistic security, because when we talk about holistic security, then we are also including the aspect of physical security. Now, digital security cannot go alone without the physical security, because sometimes journalists will face the threats, the harassment onto the online platforms, and then it will end onto the digital platform. So sometimes vice versa. So it's very important for us to put into aspect of the digital security and physical security and more other security measures, looking at the self-care, the well-being, and all that. And then there is also something that I learned a week ago called cheap fake. And this is also something that is in conversation to, it's really a version of photo shopping. And I think it's a very good aspect for journalists to also be taught on the other aspect of cheap fake, which is also part of it, deep fake, that is using AI, but this is really using maybe your laptop or your device to change features of maybe a photo. And I think that more trainings on digital security or literacy would be very important in regards to that. Thank you.
Thank you for all the 4 or 5 team for your contribution. We take note of all the suggestions. They have all been captured. And can we give a round of applause to all of us? Thank you very much for your hard work and your contribution. And I will say this, if you still have further comment that you can put in writing, please do not hesitate to share with us. We will really appreciate. So even when you go back home, if you have the time to go through the document and have further ideas, please do not hesitate. Happy to receive and to see how to integrate in the document. This being said, I think I'll turn to John Bosco for the next step. She's gone.
Okay, so you could see from our agenda we're hoping to tackle that last bit of any additional information that you might think has not been captured by the different topics that we've covered. And we wanted to do that in sort of groups, but we've changed our mind. We think that at this point, it's the point if you have any last remarks, any additional points to make, we can make them in the plenary here, and then we conclude. How does that sound? Okay, so if you have any last additional remarks, contributions, you can put up your hand and then we give you the microphone. Where is the second microphone?
Let me start with the lady.
Thank you. Overall, I think my question would be asking about if the risk assessment framework is looking at the multilingual aspect. Majorly because when we're talking about threats, and I would give a case scenario for, let me say, an African country where people use local languages, and these digital platforms are not able to recognize, these types of threats. How is the risk assessment framework, coming in to, identify maybe a particular maybe word used in, for instance, Luganda, that is used by, Uganda, or Kiswahili, or any other local language? Because for the most part, I think you can attest to this. For instance, on Twitter in Uganda, people use Luganda to abuse, journalists, and that speaks to, hate speech, which is a type of threat that could happen to journalists.
Thank you.
Mine will be brief, but I just really want to reiterate what was mentioned by Anna and also Victor here about adding recommendations for all the major stakeholders. I think it's something that is missing, and it's really important for us to have it because I think we might end up now coming again to start developing other guidelines for other stakeholders. So in this case, we need to follow a multi-stakeholder approach by enabling everyone understand what is their role in mitigating, some of these problems that we are discussing. Thank you.
Sorry for on this point that he has said, the group felt like if you put so much responsibility on the digital platforms and you don't also tell them that the people they're doing this for also have a responsibility, they feel like you're just making us take a responsibility while the journalists themselves do not take their own responsibility. So the group felt, as much as we are saying digital platforms do this 1, 2, 3, that the document should also say, on the other hand, the journalists have a responsibility to observe their code of conduct, those kind of things, without leaving the digital platform to prescribe what the journalists should do. But for example, the regulator, the Media Council, should already share with you, on the other hand, what are these journalists expected to observe, so that the digital platforms can respect that as well.
So thank you. Any other person? I think that's all, John. So Africtivist, the representative, please come. Oh, we forgot to mention, Africtivist is our partner. I'll let Anna Christina.
Yes, I wanted to say that this was this effort was thanks to the commitment of Africtivist and CIPESA, because we all committed to bring and invite different members that are here all today. So for us, it is very important to create these partnerships that enable us to create more conversations, to gather more inputs. It's been very, very important for us. As I said, this is the first round of the second round of consultations, which means that we're getting started and we're going to go through this process. I also wanted to say, before giving the voice to our colleague in Africtivists, is that this is one of the companion documents of the guidelines for the governance of digital platforms, but there would be other human rights due diligence, human rights risk assessment frameworks in the context of crisis, elections, and specifically in the cases of women and online gender-based violence. So we're still trying to identify, obviously, as UNESCO is the UN agency that has the mandate to protect and promote freedom of expression, we wanted to start with this specific analysis on the safety of journalists because of all the work that UNESCO has been doing in these issues over the past decades. So I'm going to hand it to our colleague so he can give us a wrap-up.
Merci beaucoup. Je suis Papa Ismaël Adien, je suis le chargé de la communication et du plaidoyer Africtiviste. Alors, le sujet de la protection des journalistes en ligne a toujours été important chez Africtiviste. D'ailleurs, notre premier programme qu'on a lancé, c'était un programme de formation en cybersécurité destiné aux journalistes, aux blogueurs. C'est un programme qu'on a déroulé dans une douzaine de pays en Afrique de l'Ouest et qui nous avait permis à peu près de former près de 600 acteurs de la communication. Ce programme est toujours en cours et on a développé une partie spécifiquement destinée aux femmes, donc, parce qu'on a vu que les attaques en ligne visent beaucoup plus les journalistes femmes que les hommes. Je suis journaliste de formation, c'est quelque chose que je vis aussi dans mon quotidien de travail de journaliste, et c'est dans ce sens que nous nous associons vraiment à toutes ces initiatives qui visent à développer des mécanismes de prévention de ces attaques en ligne, de ces violences en ligne, mais également des mécanismes, disons, curatifs pour pouvoir aider et assister les journalistes qui seront victimes de cela aujourd'hui, d'autant plus que les moyens pour les atteindre sont de plus en plus développés et sont de plus en plus démocratisés, et il est important de pouvoir toujours continuer à armer les journalistes, à également appuyer les gouvernements, appuyer les organisations à pouvoir protéger les journalistes. Je vous remercie, je sais qu'il est un peu tard, donc je ne vais pas trop monopoliser la parole. Merci beaucoup.
A round of applause for all of us, please. Thank you.
Just a final remark. This is the same form that you have in your documents. If you wrote something, please give it to me. If you didn't wrote something and you see me around and you want to, you feel the impetus to fill it out, you can give it to either one of us during these next days. But if not, you can do it online through the QR code. So thank you very much, and have a nice day.
Tomorrow it's here at 9, right? Tomorrow here at 9. Yeah. We'll exchange. Okay. I want to have a draft. I will send to you.
Thank you very much.
Yes.